The first letter arrived at the general store in Linden, Kansas on a scorching August afternoon in 1877, addressed to someone named Zelda Vaughn, and nobody in town had ever heard that name before. Vincent Fletcher stood at the counter, watching the storekeeper examine the envelope with curiosity, and felt his heart sink when he realized his carefully penned words were destined for a woman who did not yet exist in this dusty corner of the prairie. He had placed an advertisement in a Boston newspaper 3 months earlier, seeking correspondence with a woman of good character who might consider a life out west. And now, the impossible had happened. She had written back, but the storekeeper handed him the letter with confusion because Vincent had given his own address for the reply. Yet somehow this woman had sent her response to a non-existent person in Linden. "This is for me," Vincent said quietly, taking the envelope with trembling hands. "I placed an advertisement. She must have misunderstood the arrangement." The storekeeper raised his eyebrows but said nothing, and Vincent walked out into the blazing heat with the letter pressed against his chest like a treasure. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that had never held anything as delicate as this cream-colored envelope. His small ranch sat 3 miles outside of Linden, a modest spread with 30 head of cattle, and a cabin he had built himself over 2 long summers. The loneliness had become unbearable after his parents passed from fever the previous winter, leaving him entirely alone in a territory that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Vincent waited until he reached home before opening the letter, sitting on the porch step as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The handwriting was elegant and precise, each word formed with obvious care. "Dear Sir," it began, "I am grateful for your advertisement and the opportunity to correspond with someone as far from Boston as Kansas. My name is Zelda Vaughn, and I am 23 years old, employed as a teacher at a small school for girls. The city has become suffocating in ways I cannot quite explain, and your description of open skies and honest work speaks to something deep within my heart. I would very much like to continue this correspondence if you are willing." He read the letter 5 times that evening, memorizing every curve of her handwriting, every pause and comma. She wrote about her life in Boston, about teaching literature and mathematics to daughters of merchants and lawyers, about feeling trapped in parlors that smelled of perfume and pretension. She asked questions about Kansas, about the seasons and the sky, about what it meant to build something with your own hands. Vincent sat at his rough-hewn table that night and began his response by lamplight, choosing each word as carefully as if he were constructing a building that needed to stand for 100 years. His letter took 3 days to write. He told her about the prairie in spring when wildflowers painted the grass in colors he had no names for, about the cattle drives, and the way thunderstorms rolled across the flat land with dramatic fury. He described the satisfaction of fixing a fence or delivering a calf, the simple pleasure of coffee at dawn when the air was still cool. He tried to be honest without being discouraging, explaining the isolation and the harsh winters, the dust storms that could blacken the sky for days. When he finally sent it, he felt as though he had offered up some essential part of himself to be judged by a stranger. Zelda's second letter arrived in October, and this time the storekeeper handed it over with a knowing smile. She wrote about autumn in Boston, about leaves turning colors and students returning to school with renewed energy. She asked more questions, deeper ones, about his family and his dreams, about why he stayed in Kansas when he could go anywhere. Vincent found himself writing back with increasing honesty, telling her about his parents, and the promises he had made to his father before the fever took him, about wanting to prove that a man could carve out a decent life in this difficult country. The letters became a rhythm, arriving every few weeks like clockwork. Winter settled over Kansas with bitter cold and occasional snow, and Vincent found himself living between letters, counting days until the next one might arrive. Zelda wrote about ice on the Charles River and students struggling with arithmetic, about books she was reading and thoughts about the nature of happiness. Her words painted pictures of a world entirely foreign to Vincent, but underneath the surface descriptions, he sensed a kindred loneliness, a hunger for something more authentic than what her current life provided. In December, he asked her about her family. She wrote back in January with careful honesty about a father who had died when she was young, a mother who had remarried a banker, and now lived in a fine house where Zelda felt like an expensive decoration rather than a daughter. She had a younger half-brother she barely knew, and the whole arrangement felt hollow. "I teach young women to be accomplished," she wrote, "but I wonder sometimes what we are accomplishing beyond preparing them for lives of quiet disappointment." Vincent's response was bold in ways that surprised him. "Come to Kansas," he wrote. "Not tomorrow, not even this year, but someday. Come and see if this life might be what you are looking for. I cannot promise ease or comfort, but I can promise honesty and purpose. I can promise space to breathe and room to become whoever you truly are." He sent the letter before he could reconsider, and then spent 2 weeks in an agony of doubt. He had overstepped, been too forward, presumed too much. But when her response came in late February, she wrote, "Yes. I do not know when, but yes. I need time to arrange my affairs and save money for the journey, but your invitation has given me something I have not felt in years: hope." The letters continued through 1878 and into 1879, growing longer and more intimate with each exchange. Zelda wrote about her students and her frustrations with the narrowness of their education. Vincent wrote about drought and cattle prices, about his neighbor Jacob Morrison, who had helped him repair his barn after a summer storm. They wrote about books and politics, about religion and doubt, about the small moments that made up their separate lives. Vincent began to feel as though he knew her better than people he saw every day, as though her letters had become a kind of conversation more honest than any he had ever had face to face. In the spring of 1879, Zelda wrote that she was saving money more aggressively, taking extra tutoring work in the evenings. "I think perhaps next spring," she wrote. "I think perhaps 1880 might be the year I find the courage to leave everything familiar and venture toward everything unknown." Vincent began preparing immediately. He expanded the cabin, adding a second room with a real window that he ordered from Kansas City. He built proper furniture, a bed frame and a chest of drawers, a table that did not wobble. He planted a garden and improved the well, fixed every leak in the roof and every gap in the walls. His neighbors watched these preparations with interest, and gradually word spread that Vincent Fletcher was expecting a woman from back east. "You sure about this?" Jacob Morrison asked one evening, helping Vincent install the new window. "Woman from Boston might take one look at this place and get right back on the train." "Maybe," Vincent admitted, "but I do not think so. She knows what she is coming to. We have been honest with each other." The letters in late 1879 became more practical. Zelda asked about what she should bring, what clothes and supplies would be useful. Vincent tried to guide her without overwhelming her, suggesting sturdy boots and simple dresses, warning her that fashion had little place on the prairie. She wrote about giving notice at the school, about the shock and disapproval from her mother and stepfather, about the fear and excitement that kept her awake at night. "I have told them about you," she wrote in December. "They think I am insane, throwing away security and respectability for a man I have never met. My mother wept, and my stepfather threatened to cut me off entirely. But I am 25 years old, and I have lived my entire life doing what others expected. It is time to discover what I expect of myself. Vincent wrote back immediately. I will be at the station when you arrive. I will be the man holding his breath, hoping that the woman stepping off the train will see something in me worth the risk she has taken. In March of 1880, Zelda sent a telegram. It was brief and businesslike, but Vincent read it 20 times. Arriving Linden April 15 on afternoon train. Zelda Vaughn. He had 3 weeks to prepare, and he used every moment. He cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, washed curtains he had purchased specially from the general store, picked wildflowers and planted them around the porch. He bathed and shaved and purchased new clothes, a proper suit that felt strange and stiff after years of work shirts and denim. He practiced what he would say, how he would introduce himself, then abandoned all his rehearsed words as inadequate. The morning of April 15 dawned clear and warm, promising a beautiful spring day. Vincent could not eat breakfast. He rode into Linden at noon, though the train was not due until 3 o'clock. He waited at the station, pacing the platform, watching the rails stretch eastward like a promise about to be fulfilled. Other people came and went, but he barely noticed them. His entire world had narrowed to the question of whether Zelda Vaughn would actually appear, or whether this had all been an elaborate dream. The train whistle sounded at 10 minutes past 3, a long, mournful cry that made Vincent's heart hammer against his ribs. The locomotive appeared in the distance, growing larger and louder, and then it was there, squealing to a stop in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. Passengers began disembarking, men in business suits and families with children and an elderly woman with a cane. Vincent scanned each face desperately, searching for someone who matched the single photograph Zelda had sent him months ago, a formal portrait that showed a serious young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes. Then she was there, stepping down from the passenger car with a single trunk and a carpetbag, wearing a simple traveling dress the color of sage. She looked exactly like her photograph and nothing like it at all, because the photograph had been still and silent while this woman was vital and real, looking around the platform with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight. Vincent moved forward without thinking, his rehearsed words completely forgotten. "Zelda," she turned toward him, and her expression transformed from anxious uncertainty to something like relief. "Vincent, you came." "Of course I came," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I have been waiting 3 years for this moment." They stood there on the platform, two people who knew everything and nothing about each other, while the train hissed and other passengers moved around them. Zelda was taller than he had imagined, nearly reaching his shoulder, and there was a directness to her gaze that made him feel simultaneously exposed and safe. "The journey was very long," she said finally, "but I am glad to be here. I am glad to finally meet you." "You must be exhausted," Vincent managed, "and hungry. We can go to the hotel, get you a room and some supper, and tomorrow I will show you the ranch." Something flickered across her face, an emotion he could not quite read. "I do not need a room at the hotel unless you think I should stay in town for a while. I came here to see if Kansas could be my home. I would like to see your ranch, our potential home, as soon as possible." The word "our" hit Vincent like a physical thing. He had hoped but not quite believed, and now here she was, speaking as though they were already a unit rather than strangers. "Are you certain? It is getting late and the ride is 3 miles. "I am certain," Zelda said firmly. I did not travel 1,500 miles to spend my first night in Kansas at a hotel. Vincent collected her trunk, which was surprisingly heavy, and loaded it into his wagon. The horse, a steady mare named Bella, waited patiently while Zelda climbed up onto the seat beside him. As they pulled away from the station, heading out of town toward the open prairie, Vincent felt the surreal quality of the moment wash over him. This woman, this person he had poured his heart out to in dozens of letters, was sitting beside him in actual physical space, real and present, and somehow choosing to be here. "It is very flat," Zelda observed as they left Linden behind. "I knew it would be, but seeing it is different from imagining it. You can see so far. Does it bother you, the openness?" "No," she said slowly. "No, I think I like it. In Boston, everything felt closed in, compressed. This feels like you can breathe all the way to the bottom of your lungs." Vincent relaxed slightly. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking and the prairie stretching out in every direction. Meadowlarks called from fence posts, and the air smelled of grass and earth. When the cabin came into view, Vincent felt a stab of anxiety. It looked so small and rough compared to what she must be accustomed to, but Zelda leaned forward with interest. "You built that yourself?" "My father and I started it when I was 19. I have been adding to it over the years. It is not fancy, but it is solid." "It looks like a home," Zelda said, and there was something wistful in her voice that made Vincent glance at her sharply. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the porch. Inside, the cabin was neat and simple, the afternoon light slanting through the new window and illuminating the careful preparations he had made. Zelda walked through slowly, touching the table and the curtains, examining the small stove and the bed in the second room. "This is the room I added for you," Vincent said awkwardly. "I wanted you to have your own space, no expectations or pressure. You can stay as long as you need to decide if this life suits you." Zelda turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with emotion. 3 years of letters, and you still think I might not have decided. 3 years of letters is not the same as 3 days of reality, Vincent said carefully. I would not blame you if you found this all too difficult or too different from what you imagined. She crossed the room to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he could see tiny gold flecks in her brown eyes. "Vincent Fletcher, I quit my job. I argued with my family. I spent nearly all my savings on a train ticket to Kansas. I did not do those things on a whim. I did them because your letters showed me a man of integrity and kindness, a man who builds things and keeps his promises. I did them because I was half in love with you before I ever bought the ticket." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Vincent felt something unlock in his chest, some knot of fear he had been carrying for months. "Only half," Zelda smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Well, I thought I should meet you in person before committing to the full thing, but so far you are living up to the letters." "You are worth every moment waiting," Vincent said, the words coming out rough and sincere. "I thought about you every day for 3 years. I imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, and none of them quite captured how it feels to have you actually here." "How does it feel?" Zelda asked softly. "Terrifying," Vincent admitted, "and perfect, like something I have been waiting for my entire life without quite knowing what I was waiting for." Zelda reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and smooth against his work-roughened palm. "I am terrified too. But I am also happier than I have been in years. Show me everything, Vincent. Show me your ranch and your life and how I might fit into it." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Vincent showed her the cattle, explained his plans for expansion, pointed out where water ran during spring rains. Zelda asked intelligent questions and picked up on details he had only mentioned in passing in his letters. She was not afraid of the cattle or put off by the rough conditions. When they returned to the cabin as dusk was falling, she helped him prepare supper, moving around the small kitchen as though learning a new dance. They ate simple food, beans and cornbread and bacon, and talked late into the night. The conversation flowed as easily as it had in their letters, perhaps easier without the delay of weeks between thoughts. They talked about everything and nothing, about Boston and Kansas and the vast difference between them, about hope and fear, and the courage it took to build a different kind of life. "Why did you place that advertisement?" Zelda asked as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You could have courted someone locally." Vincent considered the question carefully. "There are not many unmarried women in Linden, and the few who are here have known me since childhood. I wanted someone who chose this life deliberately, not someone who ended up here by accident of birth. I wanted someone who understood loneliness and isolation, who would appreciate what Kansas offers rather than resent what it lacks." "You wanted an equal partner, not just a wife," Zelda said. "Yes, exactly that. I wanted the same thing," Zelda said quietly. "In Boston, I was expected to marry someone appropriate, someone wealthy and established who would provide for me in exchange for managing his household and bearing his children. But I wanted to be more than ornamental. I wanted to matter, to contribute, to be valued for more than my ability to serve tea and make polite conversation." "You matter here," Vincent said with quiet intensity. "Everything here matters because survival depends on each person pulling their weight. Your intelligence and education are valuable. Your strength and determination are essential. You are not ornamental, you are necessary." Zelda turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the starlight. "Kiss me," she said. Vincent froze. "Are you certain?" "I am 25 years old, and I have never been kissed by someone I actually wanted to kiss. I am very certain." Vincent leaned toward her slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and searching and full of 3 years of longing. Zelda made a small sound and pressed closer, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where his heart hammered wildly. The kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and profound, a conversation without words about want and promise, and the beginning of something neither of them could quite name. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I have imagined that approximately 1,000 times, and it was better than every single version." Zelda laughed, a sound of pure joy that made Vincent want to make her laugh every day for the rest of his life. "Good, because I intend to do it again, frequently." They sat together on the porch until the night grew cold, and then Vincent walked Zelda to her room and bid her good night with another long kiss that left them both dizzy. He lay awake in his own bed for hours, unable to quite believe that this miraculous woman was sleeping just a few feet away, that she had actually come, that she seemed to want to stay. The next days fell into a pattern as they learned each other's rhythms and habits. Zelda proved to be adaptable and hardworking, unafraid of physical labor or rough conditions. She helped with morning chores, learned to milk the cow, and worked in the garden with determined enthusiasm. Vincent taught her about the ranch, about reading weather and managing livestock, about the 100 small skills that made up prairie life. In the evenings, they sat together and talked, or read aloud from the books Zelda had brought, or simply existed in comfortable silence. The physical attraction between them grew stronger each day, expressed in lingering touches and heated kisses, but held in check by Vincent's determination to be respectful and Zelda's uncertainty about how to navigate this new territory. They were courting in an accelerated way, compressed by the intimacy of shared living and the foundation of their years of correspondence. 2 weeks after Zelda arrived, Vincent drove her into Linden to meet his neighbors and see the town properly. The reaction was mixed. Some people were welcoming and curious, delighted that Vincent had found someone. Others were more suspicious, uncertain about this educated Easterner who had shown up to claim a place in their community. Zelda handled both reactions with grace, answering questions honestly and showing genuine interest in the people she met. At the general store, the storekeeper who had been handling their correspondence for 3 years grinned broadly. "So you are the famous Zelda Vaughn. I felt like I knew you from all those letters coming through. Glad you finally made it to Kansas." "I am glad too," Zelda said warmly. "Thank you for keeping our letters safe all this time." They attended church on Sunday, a small wooden building that served as the center of Linden's social life. Reverend Thomas welcomed Zelda kindly and introduced her to the congregation. After the service, several women approached with varying degrees of friendliness. Mrs. Morrison, wife of Vincent's neighbor Jacob, was particularly welcoming. "You must come for supper this week," she insisted. "Jacob has been helping Vincent prepare for your arrival, and I am desperate to hear about Boston. We do not get many visitors from back east." They went to the Morrison Ranch on Wednesday evening. Jacob and his wife, Sarah, had 3 young children who stared at Zelda with wide eyes until she won them over by helping the oldest with her reading lesson. Over roast chicken and potatoes, the adults talked about ranching and weather and local politics. Vincent watched Zelda fit seamlessly into the conversation, asking intelligent questions and offering thoughtful observations. When Sarah mentioned struggling to teach her children beyond basic literacy, Zelda immediately offered to help. "I was a teacher in Boston. I would be happy to work with your children and any others in the area who might benefit. I need to find some way to contribute beyond ranch work." Sarah's face lit up. "That would be wonderful. There are at least 6 families within riding distance who would be thrilled to have their children properly educated." The idea took root quickly. Within 2 weeks, Zelda had organized a small school that met 3 times a week at the church. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic to children ranging from 6 to 14, using methods and materials far more advanced than anything previously available in Linden. The parents were grateful, and Zelda was fulfilled, finding purpose in this new life she was building. As spring turned to summer, Vincent and Zelda fell into an easy partnership that felt more like a long marriage than a brief acquaintance. They worked together during the day and sat together in the evenings, their conversations ranging from practical matters to philosophical debates. The physical tension between them continued to build, expressed in increasingly passionate kisses, and the way their bodies seemed to gravitate toward each other whenever they were in the same room. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset, Zelda turned to Vincent with sudden seriousness. "I want to marry you." Vincent, who had been building up courage to propose for weeks, felt his breath catch. "You do?" "Yes, I have been here for 7 weeks. I love this life. I love Kansas. I love you. I see no reason to wait longer when I am absolutely certain." "I was going to ask you," Vincent said, slightly dazed. "I have been trying to find the perfect moment." "This is the perfect moment," Zelda said firmly. "I do not need grand gestures or elaborate planning. I just need you to say yes." Vincent laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Will you marry me, Zelda Vaughn? Will you be my wife and my partner and build this life with me?" "Yes," Zelda said against his mouth, kissing him between words. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church, with most of Linden in attendance. Zelda wore a simple white dress that Sarah Morrison had helped her sew, and Vincent wore his suit and could not stop smiling. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, and when Vincent kissed his bride, the congregation applauded. They celebrated afterward with a picnic on the church grounds, the whole community coming together to welcome Zelda officially into their midst. The wedding night was tender and nervous and ultimately beautiful. Two people who had shared their minds and hearts for 3 years, finally sharing their bodies as well. They lay together afterward in Vincent's bed, now their bed, skin to skin in the summer darkness, and whispered promises about the future they would build together. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked, tracing patterns on Zelda's bare shoulder. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Zelda said honestly. "Every day here feels more real than my entire life in Boston. I feel like I finally became myself the moment I stepped off that train." "You were always yourself. You just needed space to show it." "We needed each other," Zelda corrected. "I could not have done this alone. Your letters gave me courage. Your faith in me made me believe I could be more than what I was." Vincent kissed her temple softly. "You gave me hope when I was drowning in loneliness. You made me believe that asking for what I wanted was not foolish or presumptuous." They made love again, slower this time, learning the geography of each other's bodies and the rhythm of shared pleasure. Afterward, they slept tangled together, the windows open to let in the cool night breeze and the sound of crickets singing in the grass. The summer of 1880 was the happiest of Vincent's life. He and Zelda worked side by side during the day, building and improving and planning for the future. Zelda's school continued to grow, with more families sending their children to learn from the educated Easterner who had somehow ended up in Linden. In the evenings, they were lovers and friends, cooking together and reading together and talking about everything under the sun. In August, a severe thunderstorm rolled across the prairie with violent intensity. Vincent and Zelda worked together to secure the livestock and board up the windows, moving with the practiced efficiency of a team that had been working together for years, rather than months. When lightning struck a tree near the barn, starting a small fire, they fought it together with buckets of water until the rain intensified and finished the job. Standing in the downpour, soaked and exhausted, Vincent looked at his wife and felt a surge of love so powerful it was almost painful. "I never want to face a storm without you," he shouted over the thunder. Zelda grinned, rain streaming down her face. "Good, because I have no intention of missing any of them." In September, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent one evening after supper, simply and directly, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Vincent felt joy and terror in equal measure, the weight of impending fatherhood settling over him like a mantle. "Are you frightened?" Zelda asked. "Terrified," Vincent admitted. "But also happy." "So happy, Zelda. We are going to be parents." "We are going to be excellent parents," Zelda said firmly. "Between your common sense and my education, this child will be well equipped for life." They spent the fall preparing for the baby, Vincent building a cradle and Zelda sewing tiny clothes with help from Sarah Morrison and other women from town. The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Zelda continued teaching until December when the winter cold and her growing belly made travel too difficult. She spent the winter months reading and knitting and planning lessons for when she could return to teaching. The baby came in March of 1881, a week before Zelda's 27th birthday. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Sarah Morrison and Mrs. Thomas, the Reverend's wife who had experience with birthing. Vincent paced outside the bedroom, feeling utterly useless, listening to Zelda's cries with growing panic. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a surprisingly loud voice, Vincent was allowed in to meet his son. Zelda looked exhausted but triumphant, holding the tiny bundle against her chest. "Meet your son, Vincent Fletcher. What should we name him?" They had discussed names extensively but never quite agreed. Looking at his wife and his child, Vincent felt certain. "Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Fletcher," Zelda smiled. "Thomas Fletcher, I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to Kansas." The baby years were exhausting and wonderful, filled with sleepless nights and small miracles. Vincent discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor with Thomas at 3 in the morning while Zelda slept. Zelda returned to teaching when Thomas was 6 months old, bringing the baby with her and teaching the older children about infant care while simultaneously conducting lessons. In the summer of 1882, Zelda's mother sent a letter, the first communication from Boston since Zelda had left. It was stiff and formal, congratulating Zelda on her marriage and the birth of her son, but underneath, the proper language was a tentative reaching out. Zelda cried when she read it, and Vincent held her while she processed the complicated emotions. "You want to write back?" he asked gently. "Yes," Zelda said after a long moment. "I do not need her approval, but I do not want to be estranged forever. She is still my mother, however imperfect." Zelda wrote back, including a photograph they had paid to have taken in Kansas City during a rare trip to the city. The correspondence remained formal but gradually warmed over the following years. Zelda's mother never visited Kansas, but the letters became more frequent and more personal, bridges being rebuilt slowly across the distance. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler to small boy, Vincent and Zelda's ranch prospered. They expanded their cattle herd and improved their land, building a larger barn and adding another room to the cabin. Zelda's school became a permanent institution in Linden, with the community building a proper schoolhouse and voting to pay her a small salary. Vincent served on the town council and helped organize a volunteer fire brigade after a drought year brought dangerous conditions. In 1885, Zelda became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, and she was sick for months before finally settling into a more comfortable third trimester. Their daughter was born in January of 1886, arriving quickly and easily after her mother's difficult pregnancy. They named her Claire, after no one in particular, simply because they both loved the name. Thomas, now nearly 5, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. Vincent watched his son gently touch Claire's tiny hand and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. His family was growing, his life was full, and the woman he had waited 3 years to meet was still the best part of every day. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas started attending his mother's school, proving to be a quick student with his mother's love of books and his father's practical intelligence. Claire grew into a spirited child who followed her older brother everywhere and showed early signs of her mother's determination. The ranch continued to prosper, and Vincent became known throughout the county as a fair dealer and skilled rancher. In the summer of 1890, a decade after Zelda had arrived in Kansas, they hired a photographer to come to the ranch for a family portrait. Vincent and Zelda sat with Thomas, now 9, and Claire, 4, arranged formally in front of the cabin. But before the photographer could take the picture, Claire giggled and Thomas made a face, and suddenly they were all laughing. The photographer captured that moment instead, a family caught in genuine joy, and when Vincent saw the finished photograph weeks later, he thought it was the most honest image he had ever seen. "We look happy," Zelda said, studying the photograph. "We are happy," Vincent corrected. "You made this possible, Zelda. When you got off that train 10 years ago, you changed everything. We made this possible, Zelda insisted. Your letters gave me courage to leave Boston. Your patience let me find my place here. Your love made me believe I could be more than what I was raised to be. Vincent pulled her close, still marveling after all these years at the miracle of her presence in his life. Do you ever regret it, leaving everything familiar for this? Never, Zelda said firmly. Not once. This is the life I was meant to live. You are the man I was meant to love. Everything that came before was just preparation for getting here. They stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard, and Vincent felt the peace of a man whose deepest wishes had all come true. The lonely cowboy who had placed an advertisement in a Boston newspaper 12 years earlier had been answered beyond his wildest dreams. The woman who had spent 3 years writing letters to a stranger had found a home more real than any she had known before. In 1892, Vincent was elected mayor of Linden, a position he held with fairness and dedication. Zelda continued teaching, now assisted by one of her former students who had grown up and returned to help educate the next generation. Thomas showed an aptitude for ranching and spent his free time helping his father with the cattle. Claire announced at age 6 that she intended to be a doctor, an ambition so outrageous and wonderful that Vincent and Zelda immediately began planning how to make it possible. The drought of 1893 tested them severely. The prairie turned brown and the cattle grew thin, and Vincent spent sleepless nights worrying about how to keep his herd alive. But Zelda stood beside him through every difficult decision, helping to stretch resources and maintain hope. They sold some cattle at a loss to save the rest, took loans they were not certain they could repay, and rationed water with desperate care. When the rains finally came in the spring of 1894, Vincent wept with relief while Zelda held him and whispered reassurances. "We survived," she said firmly. "We will always survive because we have each other." They recovered slowly from the drought, rebuilding their herd and repaying their debts over the following years. The experience had been harrowing, but it had also proven what Vincent had always believed, that he and Zelda were genuinely partners in every sense, capable of weathering any storm together. In 1896, Thomas turned 15 and began taking on more serious responsibilities around the ranch. He was tall and strong, resembling his father in build but with his mother's thoughtful eyes. Vincent taught him everything he knew about ranching and was continually impressed by how quickly his son learned. Claire, at 10, was still determined to become a doctor and spent her free time reading every medical book she could find, borrowed from a doctor in a neighboring town who was amused and impressed by her dedication. Zelda's school had grown significantly, now serving children from 3 different towns and employing 2 additional teachers. She had become known throughout the region as an advocate for education, particularly for girls, and had successfully lobbied the territorial government for funding for rural schools. Vincent watched his wife's influence expand beyond Linden and felt proud of everything she had accomplished. In the spring of 1898, as the United States went to war with Spain, Vincent and Zelda sat on their porch and discussed the broader world that seemed very far away from their Kansas ranch. Thomas was 17 and theoretically old enough to enlist, but Vincent was quietly grateful when his son showed no interest in leaving the ranch for war. "I want to be here," Thomas said simply when asked. "This is important work, what we are building. I cannot imagine leaving it." Vincent met Zelda's eyes over their son's head and saw his own relief reflected there. They had raised a young man who valued home and family, who understood that there were many ways to serve and contribute. It felt like a victory of a different kind. That summer brought an unexpected visitor. A man arrived on horseback, dressed well but travel-worn, and introduced himself as Zelda's half-brother, the child her mother had remarried into. He was in his late 20s, uncomfortable and clearly uncertain of his reception. "My mother asked me to visit," he said awkwardly. "She wanted me to see how you live, to report back about your family. I think she regrets the distance between you." Zelda invited him in with cautious warmth, and for 3 days they showed him their life. He helped with ranch work, attended one of Zelda's school sessions, and sat through long dinners where the conversation ranged from politics to literature to the best methods for training horses. By the time he left, he seemed genuinely moved. "You have built something remarkable here," he told Zelda before departing. "Mother was wrong to disapprove. This is a good life, a meaningful life. I will tell her so." After he left, Zelda cried again, but this time with a sense of closure and peace. She had not needed her mother's approval to build her life, but receiving it, however belatedly, still mattered. The turn of the century found the Fletcher family prosperous and content. Vincent was 49, silver threading through his dark hair but still strong and capable. Zelda was 43, her face lined but beautiful, her eyes still sharp with intelligence and humor. Thomas was 18 and increasingly running the ranch alongside his father. Claire was 14 and had been accepted to a special program in Kansas City that would prepare her for eventual medical school, a development that filled the entire family with pride and terror in equal measure. "Are you certain?" Vincent asked Claire for the 100th time. "You will be away from home in the city, around people you do not know." "I am certain," Claire said with her mother's firmness. "You and Mother showed me that you can build the life you want if you are brave enough to try. I want to be a doctor. This is how I get there." Vincent looked at Zelda, who smiled through tears. "She is right. We cannot ask her to be brave and then try to keep her safe from everything challenging." So they sent Claire to Kansas City with trunks full of clothes and books and letters of introduction, and they worried from afar while she thrived. She wrote home weekly, describing her studies and her boarding house and the overwhelming excitement of city life. Vincent read her letters and marveled that this confident young woman was his daughter, that he and Zelda had somehow raised a child brave enough to chase impossible dreams. In 1902, Zelda's mother died peacefully in Boston. The letter from Zelda's half-brother included details of the funeral and a note that their mother had left Zelda a small inheritance. More importantly, it included a letter their mother had written to Zelda years earlier, but never sent, expressing pride in her daughter's courage and admitting that she had been wrong to disapprove of Zelda's choice to go west. "She was proud of you," Vincent said, reading over Zelda's shoulder. "She just did not know how to say it while she was alive." "I know," Zelda said quietly. "I think I always knew underneath everything else, but it is good to have the words." Thomas married in 1903, wedding a neighboring rancher's daughter named Margaret, who was practical and kind and perfect for him in every way. They built a house on the Fletcher property, and Vincent officially made Thomas a partner in the ranch. Watching his son exchange vows, Vincent remembered standing in the same church 23 years earlier, marrying Zelda and feeling like his life was truly beginning. Now that life had expanded to include this new generation, this continuation of everything he and Zelda had built. Claire graduated from medical school in 1907, one of only 3 women in her class. The entire family traveled to Kansas City for the ceremony, and Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion as his daughter received her degree. She had done it, achieved the impossible dream through sheer determination and brilliance. She planned to return to Kansas to practice, wanting to serve the rural communities that desperately needed medical care. You would not have been able to do this if your mother had not taught you to read when you were 4, Vincent told Claire at the celebration dinner. Education opens doors. Your mother knew that, and she made sure you knew it too. Mother showed me that women can be more than decorations, Claire said, raising her glass toward Zelda. She built a school and raised a family and ran a ranch, all while being utterly herself. How could I not try to be equally extraordinary? The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the family story. Thomas and Margaret had 3 children, making Vincent and Zelda grandparents. Claire established a medical practice in Linden and eventually married a lawyer from Topeka, a quiet man who supported her career with unwavering dedication. The ranch prospered, and Zelda's school became legendary throughout the region, producing graduates who went on to colleges and careers previously unimaginable for rural Kansas children. In the summer of 1910, 30 years after Zelda had arrived in Kansas, Vincent sat on his porch and watched the sun set over land he had worked his entire life. He was 59 years old, a grandfather, a successful rancher, a respected member of his community. But more than any of those things, he was a man who had taken a chance on love and been rewarded beyond measure. Zelda joined him on the porch, moving a little stiffly after a long day of teaching but still vital and engaged with life. She sat beside him as she had done thousands of times before, and he took her hand, feeling the familiar calluses that came from years of shared work. "What are you thinking about?" Zelda asked. "The day you arrived," Vincent said. "How I stood on that platform certain that you would take one look at Linden and get right back on the train." Zelda laughed. "I was terrified, but then I saw you, and you looked even more terrified than I felt, and I thought, well, at least we are both afraid together." That seemed like a good foundation. "It was a perfect foundation," Vincent said. "Fear and hope and 3 years of letters." "Do you ever regret the 3 years of waiting?" Zelda asked. "Do you wish I had come sooner?" Vincent considered the question seriously. "No, I think we needed that time. We needed to build trust and understanding before we could build a life. If you had come right away, we would have been strangers trying to force compatibility. The letters let us fall in love before we ever met." "I was in love with you from the first letter," Zelda admitted. "Or at least in love with the person you revealed yourself to be. You were honest and thoughtful and so desperately lonely that it broke my heart. I wanted to fix that for you." "You did fix it," Vincent said simply. "You fixed everything. Every moment of waiting was worth it because it led to you standing on that platform. You are worth every moment of waiting, every difficulty, every challenge. You are worth everything." Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection repeated countless times over 3 decades. "We built a good life, Vincent Fletcher, better than I ever dreamed possible when I was teaching in that stuffy Boston schoolroom." "We built a perfect life," Vincent corrected. "Not easy, but perfect. Together." They sat together as the stars emerged, comfortable in the silence that came from years of understanding. Inside the house, the sounds of family drifted out, Thomas and Margaret visiting with their children, the next generation growing up on land that Vincent had claimed and Zelda had made a home. It was everything Vincent had hoped for in those lonely years before the letters started, and more than he had ever truly believed possible. In 1915, as the world beyond Kansas descended into war, the Fletcher family remained focused on their corner of the prairie. Vincent and Zelda, both now past 60, had begun to slow down, passing more responsibilities to Thomas and Claire while still remaining active in ranch management and community leadership. Zelda had finally retired from teaching, though she still tutored students privately and advocated for education funding. Their grandchildren were growing up, 5 in total between Thomas and Claire's families, and Vincent took enormous pleasure in teaching them the same lessons he had taught their parents. How to read weather and respect livestock, how to work hard and value honesty, how to build something that would last beyond your own lifetime. One evening, sitting on the porch with Zelda, watching their youngest grandchild chase fireflies in the yard, Vincent felt the weight of years and satisfaction in equal measure. His body ached in ways it had not when he was younger, and he knew that time was beginning to catch up with him. But he had no regrets, only gratitude for the life he had been given. "You remember the exact words of your advertisement?" Zelda asked suddenly. Vincent had to think back over 3.5 decades. "I think I wrote something about being a rancher in Kansas, seeking correspondence with a woman of good character who might consider a life in the West. I tried to be honest about the difficulties without being completely discouraging." "I remember receiving it," Zelda said. "My friend showed it to me, thinking it was amusing, a cowboy looking for a mail-order bride. But I read it and saw something else. I saw someone brave enough to ask for what he wanted, honest enough to admit to loneliness, hopeful enough to believe someone might answer. It made me think that maybe I could be that brave too." "You were always that brave," Vincent said. "You just needed permission to show it." "We gave each other permission," Zelda said. "That is what those letters were, really. Permission to be ourselves, to want more, to believe that life could be different than what we had always known." Vincent pulled her close, thinking about all the years and all the moments that had built their life together. The letters and the waiting, the arrival and the courtship, the wedding and the children and the grandchildren. The storms weathered and the joys celebrated. All of it adding up to something extraordinary built from simple components: honesty, hope, and love. "If you could go back," Vincent asked quietly, "knowing everything that would happen, all the difficulties and challenges, would you still get on that train?" Zelda did not hesitate. "In a heartbeat. I would do it all again, every moment, because every moment led to this. Led to you and our family and this life we built from letters and faith." Vincent kissed her forehead gently. This woman who had changed everything, who had turned his loneliness into love and his small ranch into a home. "You are still worth every moment of waiting. Every morning I wake up next to you. I think about the miracle of your existence, the impossible luck that you answered my advertisement and got on that train and stayed." "It was not luck," Zelda said firmly. "It was choice. We chose each other, sight unseen, based on words and hope. We chose each other every day after that. We keep choosing each other. That is what makes it extraordinary, Vincent. Not luck, but deliberate, repeated choice." They sat together as full darkness fell and their grandchild was called inside by Margaret. The prairie stretched out around them, unchanged in its essential nature from when Vincent had first arrived as a young man full of dreams. But everything else had changed, transformed by the letters that had brought Zelda across 1,500 miles, by the love that had grown from words on paper into a life more rich and full than either of them could have imagined alone. In 1918, as the Great War finally ended, Vincent fell ill with influenza during the terrible pandemic that swept the world. He was 67 years old, and his body did not have the strength to fight as it once had. For days he drifted between fever and consciousness while Zelda sat beside his bed and refused to leave. Claire treated him with all her medical skill, and the whole family gathered, fearing the worst. But Vincent was stubborn, and he was not ready to leave the life he had built. Slowly, agonizingly, he recovered, emerging weak and thin but alive. Zelda had barely left his side for 2 weeks, and when he finally opened his eyes and saw her there, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry, He felt love surge through him with renewed force. "You stayed," he whispered. "Of course I stayed," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "Where else would I be? We have a deal, Vincent Fletcher. We choose each other every day. I am not breaking that deal because of some influenza." "I am not ready to leave you," Vincent admitted. "There is too much still to do, too many sunsets still to watch together." "Then we will watch them," Zelda said firmly. "We will watch every single one that we are given." Vincent recovered slowly, regaining strength over months rather than weeks. The illness had aged him, but it had also clarified what mattered most. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them everything he could while he still had the chance. He sat with Zelda in the evenings and talked about their life, remembering moments both significant and small. One afternoon, going through old papers, Zelda found the letters they had exchanged before she came to Kansas. She had kept them all, bundled together with ribbon, and now she spread them out on the table and read through them with Vincent looking over her shoulder. "Listen to this," Zelda said, reading from one of his early letters. "You wrote, 'I cannot promise luxury or ease, but I can promise honest work and open sky and the satisfaction of building something that matters.' That was what convinced me, Vincent. Not promises of comfort, but promises of meaning." "And you wrote," Vincent said, finding one of her letters, "I am tired of being decorative and useless. I want to be necessary. I want to matter in ways that are real and tangible. You offered me that reality, Zelda. You made it true." They read through the letters together, tracing the development of their relationship through 3 years of written correspondence. The gradual deepening of understanding, the growing trust and affection, the building of foundation that had supported everything that came after. When they finished, Zelda carefully retied the bundle and placed it in a wooden box. "These should be saved," she said, "for the grandchildren, so they understand how their grandparents found each other, how love can grow from words and patience and faith." Vincent agreed, thinking about the story contained in those letters. A lonely cowboy who placed an advertisement. A woman trapped in a life that did not fit her. 3 years of words building toward a moment on a train platform. A life constructed from hope and determination. It was a good story, he thought. A true story, the kind worth passing down. The 1920s arrived, bringing new technologies and changing times even to rural Kansas. Thomas and Margaret had taken over most of the ranch operations, with Vincent serving as advisor and occasional helper when his strength allowed. Claire's medical practice thrived, and she had become a vocal advocate for rural health care and women's rights. The grandchildren were growing up in a world being transformed by automobiles and electricity, by radios and moving pictures. Vincent and Zelda, now in their 70s, had become the anchors of the family, the living link to history and the stories of how things used to be. The grandchildren loved to hear about the letters and the waiting, about their grandmother arriving on the train and their grandfather building the cabin. It seemed impossibly romantic to them, like something from a story rather than real life. But it was real, Zelda would insist. It was terrifying and uncertain and required more courage than I thought I had. But it was absolutely real and absolutely worth it. In the spring of 1925, Vincent and Zelda celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. The family gathered for a party, 3 generations assembled to honor a marriage that had begun with letters and grown into a legacy. Thomas made a speech about his parents' partnership and the example they had set. Claire read from one of the original letters, making everyone laugh and sigh. The grandchildren, ranging from teenagers to young adults, presented their grandparents with a quilt they had made together, each square representing a different moment from the family history. Vincent and Zelda stood together, surrounded by the life they had built, and Vincent felt emotion overwhelm him. This had all started with him sitting alone in a cabin, desperate enough to place an advertisement in a distant newspaper. It had seemed like such a small, foolish gesture at the time, born from loneliness and slim hope. But that small gesture had transformed everything, had created all of this. The children and grandchildren, the expanded ranch, the school, the legacy of love and partnership. "Thank you," Vincent said when it was his turn to speak, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Thank you all for being here, for being who you are. Your grandmother and I started with nothing but letters and faith. We built all of this together, through work and love and stubbornness. Seeing you all here now, seeing what our choice created, is the greatest gift I could ever receive." Zelda squeezed his hand, and when he looked at her, she was crying. "You are still worth every moment of waiting," he said softly, just for her. "Every single moment." "And you are still the best decision I ever made," Zelda replied. "Getting on that train, coming to Kansas, choosing you, best decision of my life." The party continued around them, but for a moment, Vincent and Zelda existed in their own private space. Two people who had found each other against unlikely odds and built something beautiful from that finding. 45 years of choosing each other, of partnership and love, of shared work and shared dreams. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, casting golden light over the gathered family, Vincent felt at peace. Whatever time remained to him, he had lived a good life. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. He had built something that would outlast him, something that would continue in his children and grandchildren. The lonely cowboy who had written those first tentative letters had been answered beyond his wildest dreams. Vincent lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 1928 at the age of 77. Zelda was beside him when he passed, as she had been beside him through everything else. The funeral drew people from throughout the region, testimony to the respect and affection Vincent had earned over nearly 7 decades of life. He was buried in the Linden Cemetery, his gravestone simple and honest, reflecting the man he had been. Zelda lived another 6 years without him, staying active and engaged with the family and community. She continued to advocate for education, and would sit with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the letters that had brought her to Kansas. She kept the bundle of original correspondence in the wooden box, and sometimes she would take them out and read through them, remembering the young woman who had been brave enough to answer an advertisement, the young man who had been brave enough to place it. When Zelda died in 1934 at the age of 77, she was buried beside Vincent, and their shared gravestone bore a simple inscription chosen by their children. They chose each other every day. The Fletcher Ranch continued through Thomas and his descendants. The land that Vincent had claimed and improved now worked by the 3rd and 4th generations. Claire's medical practice was eventually taken over by one of her daughters, continuing the tradition of service to the community. Zelda's school, though she had long since retired from teaching, remained a testament to her belief in education and her determination to offer opportunities to rural children. The letters, carefully preserved in their wooden box, became family treasures, passed down through generations as evidence of where it all began. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would read through the fading pages, marveling at the careful handwriting and the words that had built a bridge across 1,500 miles. The story of how their ancestors met became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that courage and hope can transform everything in the end. Vincent and Zelda's legacy was not just the ranch or the school or even the children and grandchildren who carried their blood. Their legacy was the proof that love can begin with words, that faith can be built across distance, that two lonely people can find each other and create something extraordinary. They had shown that it is possible to be brave enough to ask for what you want, to be honest about who you are, to choose partnership and love even when the outcome is uncertain. The lonely cowboy had written letters for years, patient and hopeful, believing that somewhere there was a woman who would understand what he was offering. When she finally arrived, stepping off that train onto the platform in Linden, Kansas, he had looked at her and known instantly that she was worth every moment of waiting. And she had looked back at him, seeing the man who had written those letters with such care and honesty, and known that she had made the right choice. Together, they had built a life that proved what is possible when two people choose each other deliberately and repeatedly, when they commit to partnership and honesty and love. Their story, born from letters and faith, had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, in the land they had worked, the family they had raised, and the love they had shared for 48 years. It was a good story, a true story, the kind that deserved to be remembered and retold, generation after generation, as evidence that hope and courage can change everything.